All right, we are recording. Awesome. All right, well, thank you everybody for taking time to join this this meeting. It's technically it's the Tampa Pardot user group meeting, and this is something that we've been talking about for a little while on LinkedIn, and it seems to have caught fire and generated a good bit of interest. So what this session is going to be around is, you can ignore the date at the bottom. I'm not sure why it says November 19th. Yeah, it looks like I forgot to edit that. So the purpose of this is to go over the Pardot Specialist exam guide. Myself, Tyler, Jen, and Laura will be joining us shortly. We're each going to kind of go through different parts of it. First thing I want to make a note of, and I sent an email out today about this, but I want to also kind of reinstate that this is not we can't guarantee that you're going to pass the exam because of this by attending the session, and also this should not be confused with a meeting with a training session like what you would get, like a more intensive multi-day several hours training session on Pardot. That's not what this is. This is a review. This is a look at the material that is in the exam guide, and we'll be doing some walkthroughs in the Pardot app to demonstrate some of the things that they're talking about in the exam guide. And you'll also have a chance you can ask questions if you'd like. There is a Q&A section in here. I just turned it on, so if you go to chat, you'll be able to see a Q&A section if you have questions, and we will do what we can to try and answer them in as close to real time as possible. But I guess we can do. Well, Laura's not here, but we can do introductions. So I'll go first. My name is Ben Lamoth. I'm a Pardot CRM consultant with a firm called Coastal Cloud. I focus mostly on Pardot. I also do a little bit of HubSpot and some Marketing Cloud here and there. I'm a certified Pardot specialist, Pardot consultant, and Salesforce admin, plus Marketing Cloud email specialist and Marketing Cloud admin. But Pardot is my wheelhouse, and so that's kind of where I live and breathe, where I spend pretty much all my day. I also run the Tampa Pardot user group, and I live in the Tampa area in West Central Florida. So Tyler, go for it.
Thanks, Ben. My name is Tyler Rigante. I am a senior analyst for digital marketing ops for a company called PSCU. We're in the financial industry. I am a Pardot specialist certified as well. I earned it last year at Dreamforce. I've been working in Pardot now for a little over 5 years. Small companies, large companies, B2C, now last few years working on B2B. So I've got a lot of experience in kind of setting up and kind of organizing it and operating it from all different facets of companies. So looking forward to offering anything I can to everybody in attendance tonight.
Awesome, thank you. And Jen.
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Jen Stretch, and I am an independent Salesforce, Pardot, and Marketo consultant. So I've been doing this on my own for 8 years now. My company is called Homestretch Marketing, and I basically just work with clients on various projects depending on the need. So I've been in the ecosystem, the Salesforce ecosystem. I've been a certified admin for 10 years now, which means I think I'm getting old. And I'm also a certified Pardot specialist. I've been working with Marketo also for about 10 years, and then Pardot about 6 years.
Awesome, thank you. We have someone else who will be joining, but she's in a meeting right now that's running a little late. So when she joins, we may stop to do a bit of an intro. So yeah, so intros and disclaimers, kind of just cover that now, but just again, we can't offer any guarantees. We don't have any sample exam questions to give you. We are just going to look at the exam guide and do some click-throughs to show you in-app some of the stuff that they're talking about. So I just want to set expectations so I don't get a call or people don't email me and say, I was in your group and I didn't pass the exam. And it's like, well, sorry, that's not the intention here. Just want to make that very clear. I'm not signing up for that. This is intended to be a complementary resource to your ongoing preparation for the Pardot exams. And then we're also going to look at some recommended training and references. And oops, I skipped over to audience description. So and these are all things that come straight from the Pardot's page on kind of the who, what's, and where's for this exam. And then afterwards, the majority of this is going to be going into the exam outline. The four of us will be tackling different parts of the exam, and like I said, doing kind of click-throughs of the who, what's, and where's within the platform. So I will move forward. Obviously, here's our speakers. Laura has not. Oh, there she is. She just joined. Where is she? I need to make her a. Did she join and then disappear? She joined and then disappeared.
Yeah, I saw her pop up for a quick second.
Yeah, so these are us. We will be sharing the presentation afterwards. I'll send a link to the recording, and we'll also share the deck in case you have any interest in that. Again, disclaimers: we can't guarantee you'll pass. We don't have any exam questions. This is a review of the exam guide and not an intensive study session. We also don't have, at least I don't have any exam vouchers to share. If I did, I'd share, but I don't. So just as an FYI, this is how Salesforce describes the person who should be taking the Pardot Specialist exam. Some familiarity with the Pardot platform, understands lifecycle visitor to prospect, can create and manage Pardot marketing assets, interpret metrics, troubleshoot, understand Einstein. The Einstein part is a bit misleading because I've talked to people who have said that Einstein is not on the exam, and I'm very surprised that they're kind of alluding that it would be on the specialist exam. So I would maybe just get familiar conceptually with it is, but I would not say that you need to spend a lot of time with it. And then some stuff that that are not expected to know around package install and layout config, Salesforce configuration of Pardot, process builders, custom Apex, triggers, custom HTML, JavaScript, or CSS. They don't need to know much about BDBMA. I would still get a little familiar. I'm not necessarily planning to cover that, but maybe others are. And they're not all. You're also not really expected to know or be super familiar with third-party integrations and API, though it's definitely wouldn't hurt. These are all things that they're not implicitly saying you need to know these things, but it wouldn't be the worst thing if you spend a little bit of time understanding what the API is and how it works and how it doesn't work and things like that. So with that, let's start rolling. Well, okay, here's some recommended trainings, some practice exams. This one requires membership to Salesforce Ben. Here's one that I put together. I don't know how long ago, so I don't know how good it is, but it's there. And then also Jenna Mulby is a great resource for Pardot. I highly recommend that you follow her if you are not already, because she is a tremendous resource to the larger Pardot community. And I also want to remind everybody again that there is a Q&A section in here. If you have questions as we're going, feel free to pop them in there. Yeah, both the general and then the Q&As, and if you need to send direct messages, you can also do that here as well. It's in the upper right-hand corner. Sorry. There's Laura. Okay, Laura is joining. Once she gets sorted out, then I'm going to ask her to do a little introduction real quick. Hey, Laura.
Hello. Sorry for my work meeting ran over.
It's okay.
4:30 Austin time, so
yeah, it's technically work time for you. So if you just want to do a little introduction of yourself, we just did that. I'm about to roll into the first section here.
Yep, I'm Laura Black. I've been a Pardot user since 2011, so I've seen most things and broken a bunch of things and had to fix them. So I'm very familiar with Pardot. I go by Pardot Pro on Twitter, and I have my Pardot Specialist and Pardot Consultant certifications, and I led a Pardot Specialist class for the certification group on the Trailhead community for a couple years. So I've got a lot of interesting insights of people in different stages of their Pardot career, and I'm going to cover lead routing, basically, which has some interesting parts on automation and segmentation and grade and score.
Awesome. And why is... Sorry, I'm trying to make you a host so you can, because you, for the purposes of screen sharing.
I believe it let me.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is the exam outline. Here's what we're going to be covering. I'm going to be covering visitors and prospects and Pardot admin, and Jen is going to be covering forms, form handlers, and landing pages. Laura is going to be covering lead management, and Tyler's going to close it out with email marketing and engagement studio. So let's get going. The first part of this is visitors and prospects. It composes 8% of the total exam from a weighting perspective. And these are the only two things that they really give you of here's what you should know. Describe the relationship between a visitor and a prospect, and given a scenario, apply the appropriate plan of action using prospect audits. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into, I'm now going to jump into Pardot, and we're going to do a little click around in the app. So if you bear with me 1 second, I am. All right. Are you guys able to see my screen? Okay. Is it showing up?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so we are in now the Pardot app, and for those that are unfamiliar, this is what it looks like. Laura doesn't like this, but it is what it is. Sorry, Laura doesn't. But yes, it's this is the Lightning app in Pardot, and the questions specifically that they're asking here is around. Let's go back to visitors and prospects. Describe the relationship between a visitor and a prospect. So the prospect section in Pardot, you can see up here at the top. And from just purely a definition perspective, there are two categories of people who could enter your Pardot instance. One is called a visitor, and the other is called a prospect. A visitor is an unknown entity, someone who just lands on your landing page or lands on your web page, and there's a Pardot tracking code on that web page. So Pardot is able to place a cookie to say, okay, someone's here. I may need to know about this person later. So they place a cookie. There is a section in prospects called visitors, and this is not going to show anything because this is not a true instance of Pardot. So that's going to be blank here, but oh, hey, I guess it is showing some stuff. Cool. I didn't think it would do that. So this is an example of what a visitor is. You see this create associate. This is somebody who is unknown. So there has been no association in Pardot to create this person as a prospect. The moment of association comes when someone converts. And in Pardot parlance, convert typically means to complete a form. And that we'll get into that a bit later, exactly how that all works. But that's really the relationship there. So someone could visit your webpage 10 times and say, oh, I'm interested in this, interested in that, but never actually fill out a form. Also, up to that point, they're just visitor. They're just a visitor in your Pardot instance. They're just someone who's accumulating visit data. And Pardot will still collect that data kind of as a unknown visitor. And then at the point of conversion, you'll see a bunch of data there because they were unknown. Pardot was still saying, okay, they're coming back, they're visiting, they're downloading, they're clicking. I don't know who they are though. I don't have a name to put to that IP address. And once they convert, they now have a name to put to that IP address, and that's when the association happens. So Amanda Smith here, we see that Amanda Smith, when I click into her visits, that she visited 2 pages. So these were all the things that she did, and then eventually she became Amanda Smith in Pardot because she filled out a form, and there was a recognition that the cookie and the person now come together, and you've got a prospect. When you're in the prospects tab, this is where you can see all your people. So this is everybody in your database who you've either created from, and this is all dummy data, obviously, so it's all crazy. But if someone enters your prospect database through that conversion process that I mentioned, so there's someone who's unknown, they visit your web page, and then they appear. A prospect can also be entered into the database from a third-party sync, from a Salesforce integration, from a direct import into Pardot. All of these things can create prospects. It's worth noting for those that are unfamiliar that Pardot does not make a distinction at the naming convention level between a lead and a contact. Everyone in Pardot is a prospect. They could be your oldest customer. You've had them for 30 years. They're still in Pardot as a prospect. There is not a secondary naming convention for them, which can be a little confusing when you're looking at Salesforce, which has very clear nomenclature around leads, contacts, opportunities, accounts, and Pardot, there's just prospects, whether they're a lead or a contact or a person account. They're either an account or a prospect. But this is what the prospect view looks like. You can filter by a number of ways. You can say anybody who's active, anybody who's engaged with a prospect, with a Pardot marketing, a piece of Pardot marketing. You can see everyone who is unmailable, so people who have opted out or people who have bounced. You can toggle to see a lot of different views. You can also filter by name. So if I'm obviously I'm Ben, but if I were to let's say, okay, I'm looking for this one person in particular, I would then be able to filter here and view that person. So now I've clicked into the prospect record itself. So this is what you see when you click into a prospect. So you have all of your tabs up here that show the overview. This is the contents of them, their name, email address, any company and account associations, any prospect score and grade, their date of assignment, the last time that there was any interaction, your standard fields here around first name, last name, industry, source, their mailable status, opt in, opt out. And here's where you can see whether or not they are associated to a lead or a contact in Salesforce. If it's a lead, it'll show a lead ID. Contact, it'll show a contact ID. And this CRM record type will be lead or contact. And this here is where you see prospect activities. So these are the things that now that they've been cookied, now that there's a cookie to associate with this person, you're now able to say they filled out this form, they visited this web page, they clicked on this link, they clicked through to this Google ad, any number of things. That is all intended. That all shows up here. It should show up here. There are asterisks and caveats to that I'm not going to go that deep in for this conversation, but this is where you see all this information. But for someone to actually get a prospect record like this, they will have if they came from your website as a conversion, as a form completion, they will have started as a visitor, and then Pardot will then do that conversion or that merging of this unknown with this now known entity because they see that cookie, and now they're able to say, okay, this is Amanda Smith. Amanda Smith has been cookied, and then now this Amanda Smith person filled out a form. And now I'm able to create them in Pardot as a prospect, and I'm able to merge their visit data, all their previous visit data, with this now known record that is Amanda Smith. So the second one is kind of a curious naming, and I'm curious. I'm wondering, Laura, if you happen to be able to. So it says, given a scenario, apply the appropriate plan of action using Pardot Audits. What does that mean? I mean, that feels kind of broad.
So I would assume that to be like the
There's an audit
in the prospect.
That was my thought too, but I was like, that feels oddly specific, like, because I guess that makes sense if you want to backtrack through what happened to somebody.
Right. So generally the way Salesforce words their questions, they'll give you a scenario and they'll want you to like break out step by step, how would you go about it? And the Pardot specialist exam and to a larger extent the consultant exam have that same kind of wording. So it will be something like your sales VP wants you to help them host a webinar. How would you go about doing this in Pardot? And so the answers might be scenarios like, okay, make sure you have a webinar connector, set up a Pardot landing page with a form, make sure you have register for the webinar as a completion action. So the step by step by step. And so you would pick the answer that is most correct. And so if you're given an answer that's like, use an automation rule to register them for the webinar, that would be incorrect because that's not a completion action not an action available in automation rules. So they could be meaning, as an audit, they could be meaning, what are the steps?
Okay. Interesting. So given a scenario, apply the appropriate plan of action using prospect audits. So
that's the really worded.
It is, like, because prospect audits throws me because there is an audit tab on the prospect record. Yeah. So I think my immediate mind, like my mind just goes to, I guess tell them about the audits. But I guess given a scenario, apply the appropriate plan of action using Pardot, using prospect audits, and they capitalize it, which implies it's a thing.
Yeah, I would say it's a very badly worded question. My guess is that by like, given a scenario, do this, it's like you're going to be given a scenario like what I described, and you have to figure out what's the most appropriate thing. The wording of Pardot prospect audits is very much backtrack looking. Like this field was filled in, the old value was blank, the new value was 1, meaning they're marked do not email, things like that. That doesn't really map.
Yeah, it's just such a strange wording. So I mean, I'm in the visitor, I'm in the audits, so I guess we can just kind of check this out. It's funny, I just realized that this is called visitor audits. Mm-hmm. So that's a strange wording for this in the prospect record.
Yeah. Because you went in through the visitors panel, I think.
Oh, okay, interesting. That would make more sense. All right, so I'm in here. Nope, still says visitor audits.
And from what I remember, to Laura's point, I think questions are, a field was updated from XYZ to ABC. Where would you find that data was updated? And then the answer would be, the prospect audit table. So I think it's more around like knowing where, like how to find the audit table, and then what types of changes or actions or data is logged there.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So
on a good point here on your screen is like, we're seeing visitor association change. That's something as a Pardot admin you would expect to see, and that is literally Ben has been cookied by filling out a form. So knowing what that means, and then knowing, on the left-hand column, it's telling you what field was affected, what type of field it is, then what is the old value and the new value. The source column is what is the thing that caused that change, and then the date and time that it happened. And then I would also say scroll down to the bottom, Ben, and you'll see sections for, were there automation rules that applied to this prospect? Were they in any engagement studio programs? If they were imported as a CSV, they would show up there. So understanding what is on this page is highly relevant to the Pardot admin.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you for clarifying. I was really thrown by that, by the wording of that. So yeah, the audits, when you're in a prospect record and you've got all these tabs up here, there are a lot of these are all really important, but the audits one is very important because it gives you a look back to understand. It gives you an accounting of everything that's happened to this prospect. So if there's an import, for example, that happens, and you're trying to figure out why this person suddenly has this lead source, you're like, why does it? And then you say, okay, this person has a lead source because they were imported, and this set the import. So this allows you to then go back and look at your previous imports to see what the lead source was that was set for it. Anything like this. So it'll say website tracking here because this is a form completion. So from website tracking, it updated do not email. It updated campaign, first name, last name, and so on. But this is what we were talking about earlier with the visitor association change. So this IP address is now associated with me because of that point of conversion. I was cookied as a prospect. Like, I don't know who this 123.171 is, but it's somebody. And then I filled out a form, and that became me.
That's your IP address. So basically, you were the anonymous visitor with just that IP address up until the moment you filled out that form and got cookied. So it just feels like you went from anonymous to now known Ben Lamont. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. Nope. That's exactly how it works. And thank you for kind of walking me through what prospect audits means.
It's a very badly worded bullet point.
It is a really strangely worded because it implies something that's like there's something called, I don't know, I'm not going into that.
Yeah.
So and this is something else. This is great. Automation rules, engagement programs, and import audits. So this right here will tell you, has this person been subject to any automation rules? And we'll be getting into automation rules at another point in this session. Yeah, with Laura. So she may do a callback to this, but this is what that means. So at the prospect level, there's an accounting of the different automation rules that you have running that are active, and if this person was subject to it, when they were found, and when that change was applied from that automation rule. Similarly, anybody who's in the midst of an engagement studio program, Tyler will get into that. Are they part of it? When do they start? How many program entries? How many times did they enter this engagement studio? And also, were they part of any imports, any prospect imports? So there's a lot of information here that you can gather. So if somebody comes to you and says sales, why did this happen? Why is this person showing up as being owned by Chris? It should be owned by Jen. So that's weird. I wonder how that happened. So you can go in and it'll show you ownership changes, saying this was switched from Chris and now it's owned by Jen. And you can see when, and you can see what caused it. If it says CRM, then it means that the CRM pushed that change. All right, so I'm going to go into the next stage here, which is administration. And administration it composes 11% of the exam, of the weighted exam, and it touches on 3 points here. Illustrate how to create, edit, and map fields. Explain the relationship between Pardot and Salesforce, and describe capabilities of the Pardot recycle bin. These are 3 super important topics. So let's first look at illustrate how to create, edit, and map fields. So accessing the creation, editing, and mapping field functionality lives in Pardot settings. We go up to more, and I see Pardot settings. Next, I'm going to go to object and field configuration. And this is where I see my mapping abilities. I can configure and map account fields between Salesforce and Pardot, opportunity fields between Salesforce and Pardot, and prospect fields between Pardot and Salesforce and Pardot rather. Custom objects can also be done. Do you think that this gets in the specialist?
It's good to know. They won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's good to know that it exists and that you can connect up to 4 custom objects on, like, the advanced plan comes with 4, and you can buy it on other plans. But you really can't do much with custom objects. You can't use the fields in emails you're sending. So
I know.
Other than
kills me.
Being able to say, no, you can't do that, which is never going to be a question, because the tip for passing Salesforce exams is, which of these answers make Salesforce look the best? That's probably the answer. And so an answer that's not possible is probably not going to appear on your test.
That's a good tip. That's a good. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a good tip.
Really good.
Yeah. All right. So then let's let's look at the account. So account in Pardot maps to account in Salesforce. So you can do your mapping in here. What you have here, you have default fields. These are all your default fields that map annual revenue. It'll tell you the field name in Pardot, the type, and what the CRM field is in Salesforce. So everything here, if it has a field here, it means it's mapping between Pardot and Salesforce.
And the thing I'll point out, and this is not on the test, but CRM field is actually what Salesforce calls the API field. So it's not the value that appears. It's the actual API name in the back end of the setup page. So
yeah, and you know that, and you can, I see that here because of the lack of spacing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's a great point. This is not field name to field name. It's field name to field ID. Yeah. Really.
And custom fields will have the __C in that column. So just be aware that you're looking at the field name. That's an excellent example right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is that's a great example. You see that these are default fields that are just kind of smushed together. But then if you were to create a custom field, it looks different. It's __C, which is to denote that it's a custom field.
Yeah. So understanding that, like, if you have renamed a field in Salesforce, but left the same API name, you may be confused by what you're looking at here. But hopefully you have better documentation than that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point. And so I'm going to go into, if you were to want to add another custom field, you click that custom field, and these are the options you're presented with. It's going to ask you to name it. It's going to ask for a type. You've got several types here that you can use: a text, number, date, checkbox, dropdown, etc. It's going to ask you then to map to the corresponding Salesforce ID, and this is kind of frustrating because this is where I would love it to be the field name, and it's not. It's you have to know we have to kind of say this looks like the API. I've had in some cases to have like a screen side by side of here's what I think it is, because in some cases, especially with custom fields, the CRM ID is like wildly different from the actual field ID and a field name in Salesforce. And so I've mismapped things because I assumed that, oh, this looks like it's spelled the same way, but it's not the same. Someone had changed something at some point and but because you can't change the API, once you create it and save it in Salesforce, that's it. You can't go back and rename it. But you can rename the field name. So things get kind of weird here, but when you're going to map a custom field to Salesforce, Pardot gives you the Salesforce API name, created date, and so on. It's all pushed together. If you need to create a new field between Pardot and Salesforce, there are two things that you need to do. Or at least two. First, you want to create it in Salesforce, make sure that it meets your need. And then the other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to need to go into the profile for the connector user to make sure that the connector user has visibility to that field. I've had a lot of clients that get very frustrated. Like, I created it, why can't I see it? Because you have to go in and you have to actually, and this is kind of a sort of vaguely advanced Salesforce stuff, but you need to go into Salesforce and actually make sure that the connector user can see that field in Salesforce. If it's not set to visible, Salesforce Pardot can't see it. There's kind of a two-step process. Create it in Salesforce and then go back into Salesforce and make sure that the Pardot connector can see the field. Once it can, then you hit the little refresh button and it'll query to look for updates. And usually it'll like flash yellow at you after it's done. Sometimes not, I guess. And then you'll see, okay, cool, now it's here. I can use this. It flashed yellow at me. And the account is kind of different. And I'm going to do this again in the prospect real quick because accounts are you can't write to the account field in Salesforce. That's one thing that's kind of frustrating. Because with prospect you can't, and I'll show you an example of why that's different here. But you can't change a field in Pardot and have it change in Salesforce. It's only Salesforce to Pardot from an account field update perspective. You can't push changes from Pardot to Salesforce, unfortunately. There's several things here that you can check. That some of these will be checked automatically once you do the sync. like use multiple defined fields. You can set it to required if you want to. There's a lot here that you can do. But I want to, the big one here is the prospect field. So these are custom fields in the prospect. And I'm going to go in here. It's very similar look and feel. The one thing that's different here is sync behavior. This is very important. I've had clients and myself kind of get caught by this, because there are some fields where if you don't have the sync behavior set correctly, then you will, let's say you're running a campaign and you have people who are trying to update, and there's a bunch of people updating values on a field, but your sync behavior is set to defer to Salesforce. Let's say these people already have an existing field value. They fill out a form, and then when they sync, it's just going to erase the new field, the new value, because it's deferring to what Salesforce already has. So this is very important, because if you know that Pardot is going to push updates to Salesforce, sync behavior is important. You're either going to want to use Pardot's value or use most recently updated record. This will allow you to push records to Salesforce, and when that sync happens, Salesforce won't overwrite Pardot, and you'll be able to retain those new values. And then otherwise, you kind of see a lot of the same things here around record type. This is new. You can set a default mail merge value if you're using this for personalization. If you're saying hello customer, but if they aren't a customer, you don't want to say customer, then hello friend. So that's basically the backfill. If they don't meet the requirements of some specific personalization, this becomes the default value for this. And then use defined values. This will come from if you're trying to map to a field. So if I were to say existing customer, this should be, and then I would have thought that this would have, maybe not. Okay, that's a good one. So I check status, and whoopsie, that was weird. Why did that do that?
Tapping between things too quickly.
Yeah, I'm too fast. I'm too much of a pro. So you have status up here, and now that you have this new, now that you've mapped to a field, you have this new value. Keep this field's type and possible values for drop-down radio, etc., in sync with the CRM. What this does is, and it does it okay. It doesn't always do it as well as you would like it to. It can be a little slow sometimes. I've had these values not update when I thought they would, and I had to kind of force it to update a little bit. But this is going to endeavor to, whenever there's a change in Salesforce to a pick list value or a radio button value, it's going, because it's synced, it will then push these new values to Pardot. And you notice that these are read-only. I can't edit these because this is coming from Salesforce. Similarly, you can set a default mail merge. This is setting to use the most recently updated Pardot's value or Salesforce's value. I can set to record multiple responses. So if someone will fill out this form and they will then fill it out again and select something different, instead of overwriting the value, it will then add it as a secondary value on that field. That kind of flows well into explain the relationship between Pardot and Salesforce. That's a big question, but it kind of summary level. Pardot and Salesforce are now more than ever kind of very much intrinsic, very connected in ways that they haven't been before. And when I will tell people that Pardot is Salesforce, and that's not totally true, but it's also not totally wrong. Especially if you are using Pardot at the Lightning app. So Pardot's relationship to Salesforce is that most of the data that you have in Pardot at Salesforce, at least the standard objects, leads, contacts, accounts, opportunities, all of that data is leverageable in Pardot. And marketing data, engagement data that passes between Pardot and Salesforce is available to you in Salesforce as using a number of widgets. I'd like to open this up to Tyler, Jen, and Laura. If you have more eloquent ways of explaining that than I do, then please feel free to jump in.
Thing that's important to remember is Salesforce is the master of certain things. So when it comes to who owns a record, if the record has an owner in Salesforce, Pardot can never overwrite that owner. So if you have a Pardot form and it's the contact us form for your website, and you put a completion action on that form that says assign to user, and you pick Ben as the name, if that record is already owned by somebody else, if Tyler already owns that record in Salesforce, that Pardot completion action cannot overwrite what Salesforce has as the ownership. So Tyler will remain the owner. It won't be Ben. But if a brand new person fills out your form and they get processed through that completion action, Ben will own that record. So it's important to understand certain things. Salesforce is always the master. For fields, you get to customize which system is the master. So if you scroll down just slightly, Ben, there's a field there that says sync behavior. If Pardot and Salesforce values differ when data sync occurs, which system wins? And you can choose that Salesforce always wins, Pardot always wins, or the most recently updated record wins. And so you have to pick and choose this per field that you set up in Pardot. So for something like the source field, maybe you never want that to ever get overwritten. So you would use Salesforce's value as the primary. So Pardot can never overwrite that. If there is a value in there in Salesforce, Salesforce will always win. Maybe for something else, you want Pardot's value to always win. So maybe you're counting, for example, how many times somebody's filled out a Pardot form. You've got a custom field. Pardot's the only thing that's ever going to update that field. So you would say use Pardot's value as the winner. And then maybe you want people to be able to update their job title. So if they fill in a new job title on a form, you would let the most recently updated record win. So you just get to pick and choose per field what system wins. And understand, what are some of the limitations, like Pardot cannot really read lookup fields, but really understanding that Salesforce is the master in most cases.
And one more thing that I would add to that as it relates to Salesforce in the exam is just being aware of what causes things to sync between Pardot and Salesforce and Pardot. And on the help section of Salesforce, I know we have a lot of different links in the doc, in the presentation. I don't know if we have that specifically, but if you look it up, there is actually a list for each, so you could see that there.
I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, because there's activities that trigger. I'll add this to the to the doc here, but it's activities that trigger Pardot to Salesforce sync. There are a lot more activities that will trigger Pardot to Salesforce than from Salesforce to Pardot.
Right.
And I'll put this link in the. I'll add this link to the presentation.
And I think the only thing that I would add there is that everybody just remember that it's a concept test. It's understanding how this relationship works, what you would do. It's not going to ask you a situation, at least in my experience. It's not going to ask you for a specific situation. It's more going to ask of, where you go, what sort of sync actions are available between Pardot and Salesforce. So as we see it here and we talk about the relationships and everything, that's good to know. And the more you know, the more comfortable you're going to be. But it's still a multiple choice test. So as long as you understand the concept and the relationship and how that works, I think you're going to be just fine.
And, awesome. And that's an important point too, because there's very few things that are going to be like, go here, go here, go here, go here, and now you know the exact answer. A lot of it is, where would you go to find information about what updated a field? And that would be, for example, the prospect audit page. And so you might have 4 choices, and your choices are, the Pardot settings page, the prospect audit page, the automation rule page or the segmentation list page? Which one would you pick? So understanding, what are the different tools will get you a lot of the way towards the right answer.
Awesome. Okay. So those were my 2 sections, and now we are. Can you guys still see my screen? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Now it is.
I believe it's my section. So
okay, awesome.
I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, let's
go ahead.
see. Okay. So let's get into present mode. Okay, so guys, this just goes till 7, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna.
So I spend way too much time on my sections.
That's okay.
I'm sorry about that.
No. I'm just gonna, I'm aware of time, so I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this. So obviously, if questions come up, guys, please use the Q&A box and let us know. But so I'll be covering Pardot forms, form handlers, and landing pages. And as marketers, we're currently challenged and tasked with more leads, fill the pipeline, convert a visitor, what Ben showed you, into a prospect, so someone who fills out the form. And as you all probably know, playing around with Pardot, Pardot does this really easily out of the box, creating forms and landing pages, and it's such a core competency of the platform that about 20% of the exam is around this. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try my best to go quickly and just cover some high level areas that I want you to be aware of. So starting with this graphic, just understanding the difference in the use cases between forms, Pardot forms, and form handlers. So a Pardot form, and I will jump into Pardot and show you this, but can very easily be embedded into your website, just with an iframe code, with a WordPress plugin. You can insert it into the landing page builder, which I'll show you. That data goes into Pardot upon submission, and then you can also pull that data back into your form for other features such as progressive profiling, field dependencies, etc. Alternatively, you have a form handler, and that is essentially what you're doing is taking a line of code from Pardot and adding it to your existing form. So you don't have to redo your entire website with new forms. You just have to update it so that the data can post to Pardot as well as your database or wherever else you're capturing data. So there's a lot of similarities and differences between the two. And like, we've all kind of been saying, it's just good to understand conceptually the differences and why you may use one over the other. So the link at the bottom of this page, I would recommend you go there, and it has a whole table. I want to say it's about 15 or 16 different line items like this. But you'll want to understand why you would use one over the other. And I think there's pros and cons to both. And it's really going to come down to like your access to updating your website, the timing that you need something live, how you want to capture and track data, and just the longevity of an asset or form. So with that said, some things to lock into your brain for the exam are going to be like, I'll walk you through some of the advanced field settings and some of the different modes like Kiosk Mode. I'll touch on completion action and then form statistics. So if you click that when we send out the deck, this is going to show you all the different metrics that are available on the report, and I'll show it to you also, but it's just good to understand how they differ. So let me, and then also this trailhead is specific to form and form handlers. So I recommend doing, jump into the app now. Okay, so this is also a dev org, so there's not a lot happening in here. It's not super exciting, but I am going to show you the form section. Now, all have used forms or, you know, seen Pardot to some point. I'm not going to go through this like item by item, but just show you some high level features. So this is just a standard Pardot form. Oops. I'm just going to create it quickly. And so I can show you some field settings. So Ben did a great walkthrough of explaining custom fields and mapping and all of that. I'm going to go ahead and just add a field to this form just to show you. So this is a department field. I want to make sure I have the right type of field. Now, advanced field settings. We have 3 checkboxes here, and I would recommend familiarizing yourself with how data is captured and populated and shown to the end user in a field. So these 3 checkboxes can determine if someone will see a value, if it's been previously pre-filled, will it show as pre-filled, and will that value append to an existing value that's been there, that was previously there. And then progressive profiling. So this is one of the features that is on Pardot forms and not handlers, but gives you the ability to show more fields every time a prospect, so they're cookied and they are known, come back to your website. So if you want to, you know, learn what their number of employees is or annual revenue or et cetera, you can start showing different fields every time they come back. And then field dependencies, a good use case of this, a lot of times we'll see country, and if you fill in United States, then you see a state field pop up and then you pick your state. So this is how Pardot, how you would add that logic to say, if this field equals this, then show this field. So I'm going to uncheck that. Go ahead and hit save and then move on to the next section. So every form needs a layout template. I'm going to cover this a little bit more when I show you the landing pages. But this is where you would add anything above or below the form. If you wanted to further customize this specific form. And then lastly, to pay attention to is this advanced tab and some additional settings here. So kiosk mode, you all may remember once upon a time, we went to trade shows and we would like fill out forms on iPads and then someone would come up behind us and fill it out again. And they didn't even have to sanitize their hands or anything. Well, kiosk mode is what makes that form show up blank fields every time so that, you know, it's not appending someone else's data to my data. There's also a setting for showing not you. So if a form is populated and you're like, wait, that's not me, the not you would reset the form for a new visitor, and then some CAPTCHA options, reCAPTCHA, I should say. So moving on to the next section is completion actions. And this is where you would add, you can add thank you content. Thank you for requesting our white paper. We will follow up with you shortly. Or you could send send someone right to a link to download the asset or, you know, whatever it may be. And then also you have the ability for completion actions upon submission. So Laura will cover this in more detail, but just to know that it is an option within forms, and it's something that you set up within the form builder. Let me hit next. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and save. This is pretty simple, not a lot going on. But I want to just point out, I mentioned the metrics earlier, so you can click on View Report, and this is going to show, so this is specific to this report, and these are the metrics that I was saying you'll really want to understand the difference of each. So a conversion, meaning when a visitor became a prospect versus total submissions, which is everyone who filled out the form, even if they filled it out 100 times each. So I would recommend, for me personally, this is stuff I write out on flashcards and kind of go through them, but that's just a good way to see it. And then you would see anyone who filled out the form down here. You would have a prospect table that you could sort. And then lastly, you can also look at your form statistics, which is a table view of all of your different forms. So with that said, I'm gonna cover one more. Oh wait, you know what? I'm so sorry. I wanted to show you quickly quickly a form handler. So I'm just going to open up an existing one as a demo, but if I go ahead and edit it, so you can see the options you have with a form handler. Again, you have kiosk mode. You have the option to forward the data, disable throttling. You can set some specific URLs if you want. Completion actions are also available on a form handler. And then down here is where you would map your existing names, field names, to the Pardot fields that you're using. And then if I just cancel this, oops. And then this endpoint URL, so that's all you're doing is taking that line and adding it to your existing forms. So it is a pretty simple process. Okay, so I'm going to spend a couple more minutes and then I'm going to pass the baton. Layout templates and landing pages. So basically what you'll want to be familiar with here is the difference between the two and when and how to use them. Layout templates I think of as like your theme or your code, your look and feel, versus landing pages is like your page with your content, your images, your form. And again, it's going to be the same thing with landing page statistics, understanding where to find them, what all the metrics mean, and then differences of where to look for something. For example, form reports versus landing page reports. So let me jump back into okay, so layout templates, and I'm just going to show you this quickly, that in a layout template, you have the option to import from a URL. So if you want to grab your general theme from your website, you could bring it here, import it, and kind of finesse it so it looks the way you want it. This is where you would create the styling for your form, so specific to what I showed you when I created the form. And then basically you just can save it and then you have a layout template, and now you have to go in and apply it to a landing page. So if I add a new landing page and it's going to ask me you can create a form, use an existing one, or no form. I'll just create what we just used. And then now you have the option, insert the layout or use a stock Pardot one. You can update anything you want, go ahead and hit save. And then up here as well, now we'll jump to the metrics. So you can view report. Now you'll see this looks really similar to what we looked at the form report. It's just you're looking at essentially a different asset. But you'll see all the different statistics. You'll see the prospects who filled it out on that form. And then if you click on landing pages, you can also see the table view of all of the pages. So I believe that is everything I wanted to cover. That was just like, I put myself in 2 times speed. But that's all I have for this section. So Laura, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and let you take it from here. And I think you're on mute.
And it wanted me to pick a different microphone. Okay. here we go. So I'm going to share this screen. Come on, computer, work with me. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to cover really quickly. I'm looking at your slides, so sorry. I'm going to cover lead management, and I just have a couple links. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong buttons. Just some links, and then we're going to distribute the slides later, right, so people can click through all these cool things. So I'm going to talk about the different automation tools in Pardot. The links that I'm including here are links to the Salesforce help articles. This second link on the page about choosing the right automation tool goes to this flow chart. This is really, really important to understand. Some of the questions you're going to get are around, if you want to do this, which automation tool do you use? And so this is the flow chart that would help you decide which one to use. So things like, I want to put people on a list. Okay, do you only want to put them on a list once? Cool, you would just use a segmentation rule to put people on a list because the segmentation rule only runs once. Do you want that actually to continue going? Yes, I want to continually keep adding people to that list. Okay, do you also want to change a field at the same time and perform an action? Then you might be doing it from the form itself, or you might be doing it from an automation rule. So understanding kind of the logic of when you would choose one or another, follow the flow, and the green boxes are what you would choose, right? So make sure you understand this is a big part of the logic of how you build something in Pardot. And then these links are where you can read about where all the segmentation rules are, and also Pardot grading and scoring. So I'm going to dive into the app, and I'm going to start over here in the Pardot settings things. I'm actually going to start with the scoring page. So this is when you have your Pardot website cookie on your website and people are filling out forms. How do you know that they're an active person? What kind of points does somebody get for filling out a form versus opening an email versus clicking an email versus filling out a landing page, and so on and so on. So in Pardot settings, you come to the automation settings and the scoring. This section here is all of the default scores all across the system. So every form handler submission is worth 50 points. Every landing page success, which is a form on a Pardot landing page, is worth 50 points. Every page view is worth 1 point. So if they're cookied and they're clicking around your website, they're worth 1 point by default. There's also some things here for opportunities. Tracker link click. This is a rewritten and encoded link in a Pardot email that you send, is worth 3 points per click. And then scoring categories are interesting, but they're not going to really be part of your test, so I'm not going to dive into them. They're really cool, one of my favorite features. If you want to change any of the default settings, you just click Edit Scoring Rules, and you pick which one you want to change. So if I want to change that a form submission isn't worth 50 points, it's going to be worth 150. This is a retroactive real-time update. So if I have 3,000 people who have ever filled out any of my Pardot forms, it's going to rescore all of those people times the number of forms they have filled out. So this is not something you should do lightly. And so most of the time, if you're using Pardot, I say live with Pardot's basic scoring out of the box for a while until you understand what you want to do. But this is where as you put out all of your Pardot forms, each form that is out there is worth this many points. This is how you change the scores for it. So do you understand, what all these things mean? And understand, that these are all of the Pardot activities that can create syncs, right? Somebody is showing Pardot, is active in Pardot, is clicking through your things, they're accumulating points. Or they're losing points for something. This is what Pardot considers an activity. Visitor filters are good to know, but aren't super important. It's basically if you wanted to ignore people who are visiting your website, like in normal days, you'd be in your office, you might enter the IP address of your office so that Pardot is ignoring the people who are in your office visiting your website. That's visitor filters. So I'm going to dive over to automations. And Tyler's going to cover Engagement Studio, so I'm not going to dive into that. But automation rules, this is how you make Pardot do actions for you frequently. So I said if you want to add somebody to a list, if you want to do it one time, you might do a segmentation rule. If you want to continue doing it, you might choose an automation rule. You would really choose an automation rule if you wanted to add them to a list and change a field at the same time. So for example, I might make this rule here where I'm looking for people who have filled out my forms with junk in the email domain. And this is going to put them on a junk list, and it's also going to mark them as do not sync with the CRM. And I'm also going to change their default field, do not email, to, it says to in there, do not email. So this is going to mark them as unmailable if they are from one of these email domains. So the prospect default field email contains @bugmenever, or it includes an exclamation point or a %sign. Junk data is matching my rules. Then these actions are going to apply, right? So this is, here's the rules I'm setting up, and here's the actions, and that's why it's called an automation rule, because there's rules automatically running that are applying actions. So understanding automation rules and what they can do. And automation rules can do more than just add people to a list. So I talked about a segmentation rule. A segmentation rule is under the prospects category. A segmentation rule is a one-time thing. And all it can do is segment people. So you have the same options for rules. So you can do any of like the default fields or custom fields or account fields matching criteria. So let's say I wanted to find everybody where the country is let's say Canada. Everybody where the country is Canada, and I want to do this action to them. Well, I only have actions like involving segmentation. So adding to a CRM campaign, applying tags, adding a prospect to a list. You notice I don't have any of those things that are going to change a field value. This is also only a one-time thing. This will not continue to run in the system. It will only do this segmentation at the time I hit this green run segmentation button, and then it's done. So it's a one-time thing, and it only has to do with adding to a list or something like that. If you want something to continually match people who are in Canada, you want probably an automation rule, maybe a dynamic list. I'm going to dive over to segmentation lists. And there's basically two kinds of lists. There are static lists and there are dynamic lists. So a static list is just a list where you have to manually add or subtract people to get them on the list. So by manual, I mean you might run a segmentation rule to add them to the list, or you might have a form where the completion action is add them to this list. A dynamic list uses that logic, but all it is a list that continually updates. So if they're in Canada, they'll continue to join the list. If their country gets updated to United States, they're going to fall off the list automatically. So I love dynamic lists. This is one of my favorite features, and I use them probably more often than I should. But basically, just give it a name, check the box for dynamic list, and then you're in the same sort of setup where you're looking at things like the account field for billing country, you know, is, and then if you have a pick list set up, it would be good, but I don't have it in my dev org. But I can do Canada, I can do semicolon to get an or. I know Salesforce uses a comma to get an or, but in Pardot it's a semicolon. So this basically all it will do is look for if their account field for billing country is one of those three countries, those people, those contacts, because only a contact is on a account, will automatically join this list. And if their account is updated to be, oh, they're in the UK, not in the United States, those people will automatically fall off this list. That's the beauty of a dynamic list. It's constantly updating, but it's just a list. It's not changing any field values. So that's the basics of segmentation. Profiles has to do with the letter grade. So Pardot, I mentioned, has activities which are associated with a score. they have 50 points of activity. 50 points is the point where they filled out a form based on the default field values. So maybe they filled out a form and they got 50 points, or they were sent an email and clicked through the email that was worth 3 points, and they visited a bunch of web pages and they did something else and something else, and they're at 30 points, right? So that's their activity. That's how interested they are in you and your company. A letter grade is how interested you should be in the person. So by default, the default prospect grade, Pardot comes with a few examples. And I've filled mine out a little bit. I like to be a little more descriptive because otherwise it's really obnoxious to understand what it is. But so a letter grade A through F is the US letter grade system. So I'm going to give them more letter grade if they're in the United States or Europe. But if they're in any of the countries in South America or Africa, that's not worth as much. If they're in Asia, I'm not allowed to sell in Asia. So I'm not going to give them a letter grade at all. I'm just going to skip giving them a letter grade. Or if their country is blank, I'm not going to do that. So I set up all the individual line items and how much I want to weight each one. So like if their department is marketing or sales, I'm going to give them 2/3 of a letter grade. So they would go from a C- to a C to a C+. That's a letter grade adjustment. But if they're an executive, they would go from a C- to a B-. That's a full letter grade adjustment. You can get 1/3, 2/3, and 1 full letter grades. Now, once you set them up, Pardot doesn't automatically do this for you. You actually do this in automation rules. So I'm going to go back to automation rules and show you. You set up here, for example, is my, I changed my mind partway through. I said North America. So I set up my logic looking for the prospect default field country is, United States, Canada, Mexico, blah, blah, blah. I pick all of my countries and put them in here. And then the action is change profile criteria. You're looking at the default profile. If you have more than one profile, you would choose between them. And I have set up to 4 profiles for a company before. And then I pick the line item, and I'm picking the one where location is United States or Europe. And I'm picking the word matches. And this is one of the most frustrating parts of Pardot. But this matches or does not match influences the letter grade. So remember on the other page, I showed you that it gave them 2/3 of a letter grade. Matches is going to apply that 2/3 to them. If I said does not match, it's actually going to subtract 2/3 of a letter grade from them. So you can use this single line item to do a very intricate grading system. And if you were to choose not known, it would reset them back to null or 0. So we don't know. We don't give them 2/3, we don't subtract 2/3 away. So grading is it can be quite complicated, but you usually will automate it as much as you can based on the criteria that you know about a company. So if you know the company is over a certain number of employees, you know where they're located, you know what their annual revenue is. My company that I work for is in HR, so if they have a certain HR partner, that's a question I might ask on my forms and give them a letter grade based on if the person says yes or no. And then when it comes to lead routing, I'm going to use a combination of letter grade and score. So remember, letter grade is how interested I am in them because they meet the profile of my best customer, and how interested they are in me, meaning they're shown activity, they're clicking through my website. So if their prospect grade is greater than a B+, so that's a pretty well-regarded prospect, and their score is greater than 49, so this number does not include 49, it is greater than 49, so 50 or above, then I'm going to do these actions to them. I'm going to assign them via Salesforce Active Assignment Rule. I'm going to notify a certain user who's myself. I could do things like add them to a list. I could fill in a field value. If you want to change a Salesforce field like lead status and make it be not contacted, or move them along the stages of your sales journey, all of those things are possible. So these are all pretty complicated, but if you read through those links that I have in the slides, they'll help you as you understand what you're looking at in your Pardot account. Right, and we're going to go on to Tyler, I think.
All right.
Sorry, real quick. I just want to. I realize that we're pretty close to time, so Tyler is going to kind of run through his, and which we may go over the 7 o'clock time, and if you're not able to stay on, that's okay. Like I said, we're going to be recording this, so the recording will be shared. That doesn't leave a ton of time for Q&A, so we may have another session that is more open forum Q&A. That may be more beneficial, less slide driven and more. Do you have questions about the exam? We can try and help. So that's kind of where I'm thinking we might do this. But Tyler's going to do his, and if you have to drop, then by all means, and we'll just we'll make sure that you get the recording.
Yeah, I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. Fortunately for this situation, you can't really do an email test in a sandbox. So this first part is going to be mainly slides, and then I'll try to. I've got a blank engagement studio pulled up that I can pull in, and we can kind of go through that for a little bit. But first things first, that link at the top is the kind of the subset of the main trailhead that Ben linked at the beginning of the session. There's a number of great trailheads in there, and this link is specifically for the email marketing. But I kind of just wanted to go through some of the areas that might be a little tricky. Everybody who's worked in Pardot has more than likely done some sort of emailing. It's one of those areas, like I say, that you know it until you don't, until you're staring at the computer wondering, where do I find my suppression list? How do I add my suppression lists? Things of that nature. So that's kind of the things that I'm going to go over here. The first thing, one of the first bullets it says is that distinguish between an email and an email template. Pretty simple things. An email is you actually sending it out. An email template you can build, you can edit, you can do everything that you want to. You can adjust the sender. You can do everything you can in an actual email send, but it stays within your system. It doesn't go anywhere. The different things that you can do as far the scenario, or the second bullet, excuse me. Give them a scenario, identify the capabilities and use cases for emails. This is probably one of the things that you can get tripped up on, in the sense of what can an email template be used for. There are 4 different things that you can identify an email template for. It can be for a one-to-one email. It can be for autoresponders, list emails, drip engagement, and you can turn all of those on or you can turn all of those off. But those are manually set. And in order to do that, you need to go into, as you're going into an email template, in the basic info screen, you're going to be able to, I don't know if you can see that on a smaller screen, but on the top right-hand corner, there's a little basic info button. All you need to do is click on that, and then what ends up happening is you can scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you can see. Nope, I can't zoom in on that. It'll give you the opportunity to discuss or to allow it to be used for any one of those systems. Drip and engagement, for those who aren't as familiar with drip programs, drip kind of is what the Engagement Studio has turned into. You can do a lot more with Engagement Studio than you can with a drip program. But in the event, I mean, it's still, I'm in the classic. My work uses a classic right now as we're transitioning over to Lightning. So where the terminology for drip programs is still in it. So I wanted to at least make you aware of it, that if you see something that is talking about a drip program or an Engagement Studio, it's yeah, I do have a very old Pardot account here. So Laura, have they phased it completely out then? Okay, so good. So you don't have to worry about using the term drip program. Engagement Studios are much more robust, much more user-friendly anyway. So it's actually a pretty good situation that it's actually been phased out. So thank you for that. You also want to know when you're using these sorts of emails and the elements that you need to have set up in order for them to go out. Autoresponders, You can set them up in the template, but you still need to tell Pardot how you want it to be used. Do you want it as a completion action on a form? Do you want it to run off of an automation rule after a lead gets to a certain scoring threshold? There are different ways that you can learn that you can utilize autoresponders. So you want to be familiar with all the different elements that you can use that for. List emails, whether it's a static list, whether it's a suppression list, whether it's a dynamic list, you need to understand how to set all of those up. Static list is usually just an import or a manual add. If you can go into a group of contacts, or you can take leads if you're importing it from a conference or something, you don't have the ability to directly import those leads to Salesforce or into Pardot, you can take and upload a CSV and work on that as a one-time thing. A dynamic list is exactly what it says it is. It's dynamic. It changes. I love them. I try my hardest to turn every static list into a dynamic list and figure out a reason that you can use dynamic lists, and that allows you to create different rules and regulations for creating, for having people automatically be added to and removed from your lists. You set the rules in advance, and Pardot automatically searches for and continuously searches for contacts that match that criteria and adds them to your dynamic list. So that way, if you're sending a dynamic list, if you've got a dynamic list set up for maybe a webinar series, and you're setting it out, you've got a 3 email campaign that you want to send out, but you want to send out an autoresponder, or you want to send out a follow-up to people that have attended or that have registered, you can set up a dynamic list that says, has registered for Pardot certification training, and whether they're added on day 1, whether they're added on day 4, whether they're added on day 15, as long as they're added to that list prior to your send, they're going to be added to that. They're going to be added to that list, and you're going to be able to send it to them. Suppression lists are also extremely important. Pardot does a great job of automatically suppressing anybody who has unsubscribed or has soft bounced 5 times. After a single soft bounce, they'll continue to be tried, but after 5 soft bounces, they will automatically be marked as do not email, and they'll automatically be suppressed. But there are going to be situations where you want to create your own suppression lists. If you have different product lines and you're only advertising to one product line instead of a second product line, you can set it up to your send can only go to the particular product, the singular product line, or you can set it to all customers and suppress a certain product line. There are different situations that you could use suppression lists, but there are the automated suppression lists that Pardot creates. Then there are other suppression lists that you can use based off of your other dynamic lists and whatnot. Distinguish between the metrics collected in Pardot email reporting. This is something that can be a little tricky because our email reporting it can be all over the place. You can actually have templates. You can actually have reports on your actual email templates, and it will show all the engagement studios that it's being used on, all the automation rules that it's being used on, and you can see that from within the email template itself. And if you're using it for campaign, you can kind of see a cumulative report there. But there's also the email activity report that is really the heart and soul of what a lot of us market ops people look into. That kind of talks about the click-through rate, the open rate, the spam complaints and everything. That can be a little tricky on figuring out how to get to it. So I threw in some different screenshots here. When you have your email list and you have the emails that you sent, if you click on the actual email that you sent out, you're able to pull up then you'll be able to pull up you'll see a list of the list that the list that you included, the suppression lists, when it was sent, a lot of the basic information. There's also a button up at the top right hand corner that asks you to view your report, and this is where all of your really key stats are coming in. Your open rate, your click-through rate, A lot of the basic email stats happens down in here and it happens on the screen, but don't ignore, there's some other additional information that's in these additional tabs up there, from how your clients are looking at are interacting with your links. What email providers are they using? Whether they skim, whether the interaction report up here that shows you how many people have read, how many people have skimmed, how many people didn't read, and the email client tab on the far side is again it gives you a rundown of what email providers your clients are using. Are they using iOS? Are they using iOS on their phone? Are they using it on a Mac? Are they using it on a tablet? Are they using Gmail? And that gives you a really robust view of how your lists are interacting with your content. But those, like I said, those can be a little, if you're not familiar with needing to go into all of those stats, and if you're not familiar with where that's located, that can be kind of tricky to figure out. So my advice for you when it comes to email, the email subjects on this, is to really go into your own Pardot instance. I wish I could do it here, but it's a little bit difficult. Like I said, the sandbox doesn't allow for email sends, and if I can't send an email, I can't show you these stats and how to find them and everything. But there's a lot of data that you can find in the email, from the email send tab, and really within each email send that you send out. Engagement Studio. Oh, there's one more slide. Yeah, something that we've already talked about. When it comes to things like autoresponders, what do you have to do in order to get those autoresponders to work? Is it a completion action on a form? Is it an automation rule? And different use cases in which you're going to have to utilize each of those situations. Be sure this section right here is extremely important. Be sure that you know how to, at least what those mean, and what you can do to ensure that you are following those rules. The first three, CAN spam, CASL, and GDPR, are privacy laws. DNS, SPF, and DKIM are more terms that you will need to understand and set up as a way to ensure that your deliverability rate is high. So you don't really need to know, from my experience, you don't need to know a lot of detail about what those things do, so much as how to set them up, and the importance from an email send perspective, why those terms are important. And then of course, and then the last bullet there, preference center versus an unsubscribe page, making sure that you understand that the preference center allows your contacts to subscribe to different sorts of, maybe you have a newsletter, maybe you have service updates, things like that, whereas an unsubscribe page is just unsubscribing from all your emails. And those are two different sorts of settings on your emails. So you need to make sure that you understand that there is a difference and what those differences are. Engagement Studio. The biggest thing that you have to learn here, I'll bring this down here, is really the actions that you take in an Engagement Studio, and setting up an Engagement Studio. So when you pull up the Engagement Studio, this is kind of the setup, the page that you have to that you're brought to. Every Engagement Studio needs a name. Every Engagement Studio needs a folder. But this is where you start to get into it, and who you're going to be sending it to, who you're going to be suppressing, and then different things as far as when you're going to be sending your emails. This is important to keep in mind. Something that I'll talk about in a few minutes when it comes to pausing, or when it comes to when you're sending out your emails. Knowing when you're sending out and whether you're including the weekends or not. What happens to your Engagement Studio when you pause is a big. That's something that I remember from my test. Is something that at least my version covered quite extensively. So you need to understand what happens if you're pausing for 4 days and your email gets sent on a Thursday. Does that mean you're going to be including Saturday and Sunday as that 4-day pause, or are you going to be only including your weekdays? So that's something that you need to understand. And then also something that this is an important checkbox, allowing a prospect to enter the program more than once. It's normally unchecked. So that means when you send a contact through your engagement studio, once it ends for whatever reason, it ends, it's done, and unless you manually go back and redo it, it's not going to, that contact's not going to be able to go through your engagement studio again. But maybe this is a nurturing program. Maybe there's a reason that you will want to be able to allow prospects to enter back into your engagement studio. You click on that, and that gives you an additional sort of menu option down here that gives you some additional information as to when they would be eligible, how many times they're allowed to be eligible, and things like that. Again, there's not a lot of concept questions from my personal experience, but still understanding where you go to add this sort of content and what you're doing by clicking this box and unclicking this box is important. The next most important thing that you need to understand is all the different elements of an engagement studio. There are three really main actions that an engagement studio does. An action, pretty self-explanatory. If you want to add it to a list, if you're assigning it to a group, if you want to send an email, if you want to notify a user, these are things that you want Pardot to do. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Triggers. You're telling Pardot to listen to something. So usually these follow an action. Usually you can send an email. I'm gonna go ahead and choose that first template. Usually you want to add an action in here, but you want to tell Pardot that it needs to listen to something. So you come in here and you add a trigger, and you want to see, maybe I would just want to check if it opens. Maybe I want to check if a link is clicked. What links are tracked? What links can be clicked? Only links that have an HTTP or an HTTPS part of it. Excuse me, lost my train of thought there. Are able to be tracked. So it's something that you need to understand. But you're telling Pardot what you want it to do. Hey, I'm sending this email to my contacts, and I want you to make sure to listen for let's say 3 days on whether or not my contact actually does what I want it to do. And then once you start, this is where it starts to get a little complex, and this is where it starts to get the automation start to kick in. Then Pardot kind of looks at you and says, okay, well, that's fine. I'll listen for something, but what do you want me to do if they do this? If they do open, what is it that you want me to do? Do you want me to add them to a list? Do you want me to adjust their score? We can increase their score by 5. Things like that. The third major element here is a rule. This is usually something that you would do to further segment your list. Maybe after they've opened your email, you want to make sure that their grade that you're only talking to A clients or B clients or leads. It further segments it doesn't do anything. You're telling Pardot, hey, if my contact is meeting these parameters, I want them to segment into 2 different branches and have 2 different actions. So these are the 3 main elements that are a part of an engagement studio. And those are the 3 things that you really want to make sure that you understand what they are, what they do, and how they're different from each other, and how they play off of each other. Like I said, just remember that if it's an action, it's something that you actually want Pardot to actually do. Add a contact to this, delete this contact, change this score. A trigger is you're waiting for your contact to do something. Open your email, visit your landing page, click on a track link, and then a rule is a further segmentation of after they've done this. If they decide whether or not they meet this criteria, and let's send them off into 2 separate categories. Updating an engagement. The second bullet for engagement studio is explain the process of updating an engagement studio, including its assets. So after I get done with all of this, let's say that I'm done and I'm ready to start. You still have to come up and tell Pardot to Oh yeah, because I don't have a list on here. You need to tell Pardot that you want to start. So once you're starting, let's say you've got it started, you've got a couple of emails out, and then you realize that there's a typo in one of your emails. You want to correct your typo, but so you come in here and you cannot edit a running engagement studio. In order to edit edit your engagement studio, you have to pause it, and you have to then go in and edit the elements from there. The only other additional thing that you need to know really from there is, if let's say you have clients that are all the way down here, and you wanted to add another email up here. If your contacts are past this stage, unless you resend them through again, anybody who's past this stage is not going to see this. So that's something to keep in mind, that once your contacts get past the stage, any changes that are made prior to that stage, they're not going to be a part of. Pausing, when you pause your engagement studio, all actions change. Let's say there's a up to 3-day wait where we're listening to this email open. But in order to make a change on an email, I need to get approval, and it's going to take 4 days. And 1 day, and my client has already been, and my contact has already been sitting there waiting for a single day, and I paused it for 4 days before I come back and resume the engagement studio. What happens to that contact? Does it automatically push forward 4 days? Does it reset all the way from square one? The good thing about engagement studios, and thing to remember, is it's kind of like a moment in time. When you wait, if you're in a wait period, when it's paused, and no matter how long you pause it, whether you pause it for an hour, whether you pause it for 3 days, whether you pause it for 6 months, as soon as you restart that engagement studio, everything picks up from that exact moment. So if you're waiting on a contact if you're telling Pardot you want to wait for up to 3 days before to see if a contact opened that email before it moves on to the next thing, and it's only and you pause it on day one of that pause, as soon as you resume it, it's still going to wait 2 more days before it moves on. So those are the high end elements. I kind of ran through it as quickly as I could. So I apologize if that went extremely fast. But those are the things that, according to the outline and according to the things that I remember from my experience, those are sort of the things, the high end things that I think that you really should know, that might not necessarily be familiar to just somebody who might not be who's newer, or really just mainly focuses on just creating a list and actually sending an email. So I'll turn it back to Ben and the rest of the team if they want to add any comments to what I was talking about, or there were any. I saw the chat going a little bit while I was talking. So if there are any questions, we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for manning the chat. You a lot of really good questions in there, and thank you for going so fast into this. The recording is going to be available so people can listen back to it as many times as they need to. But I'll just kind of echo what was said, is that the engagement studio is obviously a big deal. It's kind of like it's how I describe it is it's basically where all the disparate parts of Pardot come together and you're able to make, for the most part, make things move and push and pull data. And there's even cool things where you can just, like, I've built engagement studios that had nothing to do with sending an email. It was literally just complex automations.
Right.
That is a beautiful use case. And when you get that chance, I'm a bit of a nerd. So those things are like, oh man, this is so cool. Because that's the closest you'll get to like a traditional Pardot, a traditional flow in Salesforce, is where you're trying to push and pull. It's not nearly as powerful as a flow, but it has the same concept where you can add and remove and push and pull, and it's very cool that way. But for the purpose of the exam, I think Tyler's overview was great. I just want to also kind of don't get bogged down in the details of Engagement Studio. I want to encourage against that, because there are plenty of rabbit holes to go down. I think it's important to be familiar conceptually with the Engagement Studio, what it does and doesn't do, and what the different elements of it are. The listen, the action, and the if then, and how the if then works, and just be familiar with how it works. And so, like a use case of someone's like a CMO wants to be able to send a monthly email to somebody, or a how would you do that through an automation rule or an engagement studio, stuff like that. That it's like this would be pretty clearly you'd want to send it through this instead of that. And so those are the kind of scenarios where it's going to ask you kind of on the surface, like based on it's going to test whether you understand what an automation rule is versus what an engagement studio is. It's going to basically test your understanding of what those different terminology mean and what is and test whether you understand what each is capable of. And so that's something to keep.
One of the things about the Salesforce exams, they like to write tricky questions. So you'll usually get a question where like very obviously 2 of them are false. So if you can cut out the false ones, this is more test taking than necessarily tips. But if you can cut out the ones, you know, that you have a 50-50 shot is my point. Once you eliminate what you know can't be true. So try and read the questions carefully. Make a point of reviewing
as well. You can skip and come back.
Yeah. You can come back to them, make a point of reviewing your questions. Sometimes I've had exams where a question, I did not understand the question and it was like question number 6 that I encountered, but somewhere down around question number 24, it actually answered that question for me. So going back solved that problem for me. So do pay attention and have, you know, attention to detail going on, because you may find your answer later in your quiz.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are a little bit over, so I don't want to keep people. We have had some decent Q&A, so I feel like that's probably good. We may do another session that's literally just like open forum. Have a question, we'll try and answer it, and less slide driven and more Q&A. So I want to thank Laura, Jen, and Tyler for helping me out here, and I hope this was valuable for everybody. And I will again restate that I will be sending this recording through to those who registered.
And you're going to include a link to the slides too, right, Ben? So people
yes, and a link to the slides. I will send a follow-up to everybody through this through the Trailblazer community groups, register the actual thing itself, and so you'll get that. And if you have any questions, feel free to if you want to follow us, send us a connection request on LinkedIn and get connected there. Then and ask questions or whatever. Feel free. But this was a great session, very informative. I think we went pretty deep on some really good material. And for those that don't maybe have ready access to a Pardot instance, I feel like this probably gave them some visuals to accompany the material that they're seeing in there. Yeah. So I want to thank you guys for shipping in and helping out. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people are taking the test never having touched Pardot before, and you're fighting an uphill battle. It is going to be hard. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution for you. Training environments are still only available to customers. You really don't have Salesforce. Salesforce has sandboxes and dev environments. Pardot doesn't have that yet. It's on the roadmap, but I think we're a ways away. So I'm sorry I don't have something you can play with, but hopefully. I
wish. That'd be great. It's unfortunately very conceptual. Like you got to like watching videos like this and seeing people kind of click around in Pardot and reading release notes if you feel like that's something you want to do. And I mean, that's really, unfortunately, the most you're going to get without actually being in the platform. Same thing with Marketing Cloud. I mean, people try to go to Marketing Cloud and they've never been in it, and it becomes a shock that they're like, oh, there's way more here than I thought there was.
Right.
It's just kind of, it's where the popularity of Salesforce isn't catching up with the availability of Salesforce for people who are wanting to learn platforms. You have the opportunity to learn the platform as if you happen to have the opportunity to work somewhere that's using it. That's basically where it is right now. And hopefully they'll figure out a way to pivot Trailhead to allow you to have like really thin versions of Pardot, for example, or Marketing Cloud, where you can log in without being able to do much. Just kind of click around and get familiar with the look and feel. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
And
anybody who I can talk to at Salesforce, I will absolutely recommend that.
And even for current customers, if anybody's not a customer, doesn't have access to Pardot, I don't want you to feel too left out. Even for current customers, like you don't get a traditional Pardot sandbox. Those don't exist. Like you can't pull down a sandbox like you can a Salesforce sandbox. Those just don't exist. They're in development, but we're probably a couple releases away from it being a real thing, a real functional thing. So
yeah, really the only ones that have access to cool stuff are consultants. Where we can access things like that.
I mean, so like we can see like a blank dev environment, but like we had to build everything in order to show you something today. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, there's nothing pre-baked.
Yeah, nothing is pre-built. They're completely empty orgs, no dummy data, nothing. So it's not super easy is my point. So they're not withholding it because they want to be withholding it. They're withholding it because the functionality doesn't exist to give out free ones, really.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Thanks for attending, and look for the recording. I'm gonna try to send it out tomorrow to everybody, and look for, we may do a follow-up that's more of a Q&A roundtable type deal for, I don't know if we want to do it for maybe both the consultant and the specialist. We'll see. We'll talk about it. We'll see how crazy that we want to get.
And if you pass your specialist exam and you're interested in doing your consultant exam, take the consultant exam sooner than you think. You're like 90% of the way there if you've done the specialist exam.
Exactly. Definitely. Once you've done the Pardot, don't sit on it and wait a year and say, oh, I'm gonna do consultant now, because you'll lose a lot of that momentum. Which isn't to say that by passing Pardot specialist implicitly you're just going to pass consultant. There's prep to do, but I wouldn't want to sit on it for a long time.
Yeah, you'll have like most of your studying already accomplished by doing the specialist, and then you'll just need to brush up on the additional tools like B2B and some of the Einstein features.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.